Hi, Grant Thornton this month is celebrating its 30th year in Thailand. And we've had a really exciting time growing the business during that time. One of the most important lessons that we've learned as a firm, and certainly I've learned, is the importance of being a strong leader. Being a leader, but also understanding the cultural environment that we are operating in, and understanding the different ways that people need to be led or respond to different types of leadership. I'm delighted today to have with me Larry Persons, who I think Larry certainly would be an expert in how to operate in a different culture.
Allegedly.
I'm sure. But Larry, just going back, you, correct me if I'm wrong, you were born in Thailand and have been here pretty much all your life.
Yeah, back and forth.
Yeah. So, I mean, hearing some of your stories, can you perhaps just share with us some of your earliest memories of what was Bangkok like as early as you can remember?
Oh my goodness. It was a sleepy city of canals. It was known as the Venice of the East. It was actually quite charming. No traffic jams, really easy to get around. Life was simple, life was good. Good memories back in those years. And it was a different Thailand very different Thailand than the one today. My dad, when he first moved up into Loei province where I grew up, I was born here, but I never lived here for much time. I was up in Isan in the northeast. My dad went in and he was the second person to take a car into the province. And there were no roads out to the various ampas or the districts. There were only ox cart trails. My dad was the first one to cut roads through there with his Land Rover. So no running water when he first moved there, no electricity. It just a very, very different lifestyle. Everybody was skinny. Everyone was skinny. Anywhere you looked, there wasn't a fat person. It was just a different Thailand. Yeah, very, very different.
And as well as Thailand, you also were living in other areas around Southeast Asia.
Yeah, so when I was 6 years old, I was sent to boarding school in Vietnam during the war. Wow. I wouldn't recommend that experience to anybody because you're not ready to be away from your mother when you're 5 or 6 years old. But that's how we all did it back then. My sisters went along with me, and so we were in Vietnam for about 3 years in Dalat in the highlands, and the war got real intense, and overnight they decided to evacuate the school, and we were moved to what was known as the American Club on Wittayut Road. It's actually the Athene Plaza Hotel right now.
Okay.
And we were there briefly, and then to Malaysia, where I spent several years in the Cameron Highlands in the tropical rainforest, about 4,000 feet up in the air, and beautiful mountains, and then graduated from Penang, Malaysia. So I've got, I also lived in Laos, in Vientiane, for several years because my dad moved there after being in Loei. So yeah, that's why I may sound like a gringo or a honky or a white, American, but I'm really inside, I'm a mix of cultures, and some of my most dominant values are more Asian.
So I think that really makes you very qualified to comment on the cultural differences that perhaps people need to be aware of when operating and leading in this region.
Yeah, I think that alone probably wouldn't, because it would all be anecdotal, and that's where there were some things I couldn't figure out when I was training leaders in the provinces as an adult, obviously, about 15, 20 years ago. And because I couldn't find them out, I knew that good research was the only thing going to hopefully uncover it. Okay. These were things that anthropology calls them tacit values, where the people themselves function like fish in water, but they don't analyze the water, they don't discuss it and analyze it. And my fascination was over the whole phenomenon of face, saving face, losing face, how to gain face, and there are so many face words in the Thai language, and I wanted to know how that went together with leadership in Thailand. In other words, my question was, how do Thai leaders leverage these rules of face and these deeply held values to gain power? And how do they leverage the very same rules to suppress emerging leaders, people that they don't want to come up through the system? That was my question. So without 9,500 hours of research, I probably couldn't share a whole lot today, but I can share what I do have.
So if a Western leader coming to this and operating within Thailand, I guess we hear about face, but how does that really affect it? Why is it so important? And how do Thai leaders believe that they gain face with the people that they lead?
Right. Those are two questions, but if I can take the first one, how is it important? It is the most important possession in Thailand. It is the most important currency in Thailand. There's a traditional saying, lose silver, lose gold, but never lose face. So, when you cause someone to lose face, it's just like picking their pocket in a big way, depending on the level of the violation. It's super important because it's much more than just gaining or losing face. If you really want to understand Thai leadership, you have to climb into this world and understand how things work. What are the sources of power available to Thai leaders? Amazingly, there are only 3 sources of power available to all the hundreds of thousands of Thai leaders out there. How do patron-client relationships work? When you have a puyai and a punoi, and they do this exchange, this dance. What's going on there? Who gains face more, and how does it happen? These are the things I delved into. It's important to know because I really believe that if you really absorb the things I write about, it opens up a whole new world in front of our eyes, a lens for understanding codes of behavior that are going on and we just can't catch them otherwise. It just gives us deeper insight. Understanding helps us behave much more appropriately. Fewer social blunders and faux pas. And a huge deal is building trust. If you don't respect what's going on and you don't play by the rules, then oftentimes you can violate trust and you may not know the better ways to build trust and build relationships.
Fascinating. I guess it sounds like a minefield for a leader that perhaps is first operating in a culture compared to perhaps someone who's operated in, for example, the Netherlands.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that for newcomers, honestly, I find Thais, for the most part, to be rather welcoming and forgiving. They'll basically treat you as outside of their ecosystem and just say, yeah, poor dumb guy, he doesn't know. If you really do anything that it looks to them like you're intentionally causing them to lose face, things can go very poorly at that point. But I think they're very forgiving. I tell people all the time in terms of building their cultural intelligence here in Thailand is ask questions, ask good questions. Just say, can you tell me what the meaning of that exchange was right there? How was this person feeling? How was that person feeling? It's a matter of being people smart. It's a matter of being culture smart.
So if a leader, I guess it depends who they're talking to, whether it's their staff or it's people within other organisations. So as far as dealing with their own people, their own subordinates, and there is certainly a difference there where perhaps your subordinates in Thailand are used to not questioning authority, questioning certainly someone who's more senior than. Whereas perhaps as a Western leader, you see it as a plus if your people are actually really questioning and having that inquiring mind, which perhaps a lot of us, when we first come here, think that's missing.
For sure. And this is a big deal, what you just brought up. I thoroughly believe that for Thailand to step into the new economy, this is going to have to change. In order for it to change, we can't just say, listen, watch me, this is how we do it in the old country, you're going to do it this way, you're going to learn to disagree with me. It can't be abrupt like that. for sure, we need to make confrontation less scary. If you look at the culture mapping of Thais, they are way, way over hugging the side of avoiding confrontation. For most Thais, any kind of real confrontation is a bad thing. It's going to turn out badly. And with their, grid of expectation, they're only looking for the bad parts, and therefore it's a self-fulfilling prophecy all the time. Very rarely does confrontation go well. And the other thing is, because of hierarchy, they're taught not to speak up. The traditional Thai leader is not a good listener because he's considered the source of all the ideas, all the expertise, and all the commands. And everything's flowing downward. And when that happens, you condition the followers not to think. Come to me with a blank slate, I'll tell you what to do. And then leaders become really crappy listeners. So that's a huge problem. What we need is a more open style of communication. The whole idea of internal communication and communication between levels in roles needs to be reformed and remade so that it's a safer experience. You've got to convince them, first of all, that the leader isn't always right. It's going to be a hard sell. How do we do that? We model vulnerability. When we make mistakes, we admit them in front of the appropriate audience. If your leadership if you're good at what you do, it works. If you're struggling and people don't like you very much, it may backfire. But we need to tell them what we learned from errors in judgment. We need to demonstrate that there's no shame in getting something wrong. That will help to prime the pump. Couple other ideas. We need to work one-on-one with them first and not as a group. You can't sit down with a group and say, hey, come on, share your ideas. There's a huge reticence not to make a fool of yourself. And some deeply held values of au na, yak dai na, sana na, which is like show off, trying to grab face in that situation, keeps sort of this, it's an egalitarian pull downward when you're in front of a bunch of peers. Work with them individually, coach them, say, that's a good idea. I want you to speak up more. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing is to practice the 4 A's of feedback, and I got this from a recent book by Reed Hastings and Aaron Meyer, No Rules Rules. But the 4 A's of feedback is always aim to assist. If you're not aiming truly to assist, then shut up, don't give the feedback. Make it actionable. Don't talk about attitudes or whatever else, talk about behavior. So what can they do differently next time that would be an improvement? Third is appreciate. Whenever you receive feedback, thank the person for the feedback. And that makes it more open. And the fourth is to accept you can choose to accept or discard the feedback. But these basic rules, I think, make the whole experience a little less scary. Basically, the last thing I'd like to say is, in order to get there in this feedback issue, we've got to train our Thai colleagues and employees to code switch, culturally speaking. This is a huge deal. They are looking at everything that goes on through a Thai frame of reference, and particularly if they're in a multinational corporation or working with a lot of other Phalangs or their boss's Phalang. They have got to learn that their boss's culture, and in interactions with their boss, the secret is play by his rules, not your Thai rules. That's code switching. And if they start doing that, they will start speaking up more.
Okay, so the 4 A's, which is a great lesson to learn. I'll give you an example that, though, perhaps another challenge. You've worked with your Thai people and you've got them to get used to questioning and coming up with other suggestions. But you work in a business where perhaps there is more than one leader and they're reporting to a different leader, and the other leader is a more traditional Thai who doesn't like being questioned. How do you operate in a business in that structure?
Yeah, it happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
And good luck with that. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think if you take the approach I was describing, I think there's a better chance you're going to win the hearts of your followers. They will cooperate with the second kind of leader that you described there, and that leader is ubiquitous. He's everywhere. tucked in all corners of many companies, they will still comply with that leader, but with totally different motivation. It will be an outside-in motivation based on a fear of what that leader could do if you piss him off or whatever. But the approach that I'm suggesting is it's the way to win the hearts of people. And that is to communicate with them that they have value, that they have something to say, and that you are still a learner and you're still learning. So maybe you have much more expertise than they do, but you still have things to learn. There are things they can teach you. There are things that they're better at than you are. And so this opens up the possibility of feedback loops going both ways in an organization, which is unheard of in traditional Thai organizations.
Some really good advice there. Just coming perhaps to a present issue we have. We've been around here, obviously, I've been a while, nothing like as long as you, and we've had different challenges thrown at us, from floods and coups and riots and Tom Yum Goong crisis. Right now, we've got obviously our COVID-19 situation where our people are working from home, and right now there's a very good chance they'll be working from home for the next few months. Is there any advice you would give to perhaps myself or other business leaders how do you manage your people with the current restrictions we have where they're very social people and they want to get together and they can't?
Yeah, great point. First of all, a disclaimer, I don't believe myself to be an expert in this particular topic. I think there are a lot of business leaders out there that may have learned a lot more than I have, but I will offer you what I have. People are weary. They're weary and stressed, and this particular stage of the COVID crisis, it's hard to see light at the end of the tunnel. These are depressing times. Their work days are longer because they used to be able to commute and then go home and have a sense of break. Now their home is their work, and bosses, I'm hearing, are basically expecting people to be available from as soon as you wake up and get your breakfast in, you're fair game until the wee hours of the night. So I think emotional intelligence is extremely important for leaders to practice right now. And that is really being able to read how others are feeling and then manage those emotions well. I think the use of open questions to get people talking. I think getting them talking about how they're really doing is absolutely mandatory. One of the things I also do, because we're doing everything virtually here, is in anything I do, you have to turn your camera on.
Very good point.
I'm coming across a lot of organizations where people are just leaving their camera off. Who knows the person is even sitting there or what they're doing? I think that's unacceptable. So keep the cameras on, so that you can read faces, and you can determine the level of true engagement that people have. Otherwise, you're totally losing track of your team, really, and of what really went on in that meeting. Somehow we're going to need to learn to shrink back the workday. I think it's too much for people. They're sustaining it for now, but it's not a sustainable situation. Plan meetings where you don't talk about work. Have fun. Have each person order their favorite food and sit there and talk about why it's their favorite food and eat together and talk about anything but work. That could build morale. Learn something personal about someone else that you've never known. See, what COVID has done is forced us even more to what is called low context communication. And that is the message is just in the words. Just in the word. Listen to the words and you'll get the message. But Thailand for centuries and to this day is a high context communicating culture, which means only a portion of the message is in the words. The rest is in body language, it's in the facial expressions, it's in the sense of camaraderie, being together, who's saying what, who's being silent and why. And so COVID has forced us much more to low context communication. And I happen to believe a number, Thais probably by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, are rather bewildered because How do you build relationship? I was talking to a sales guy saying, you know, normally I would be out there schmoozing, you know, with these other companies, and I can't do that right now. How do I schmooze on a, you know, over the screen? So, and the last thing I'd say is positivity. Yeah. There's enough bad stuff to talk about. We can talk forever about the bad stuff. But more than ever before, we need to be more encouraging. We need to tell our colleagues why we value them. If we're not doing that, we have, here's an idea. Start off every meeting, everybody has to say one thing they're thankful for. Right. We've got to work for more positivity, because this is a heavy, heavy shroud.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something we're advising our clients, is you've got to over-engage with your people. We require our people to have 2 engagement calls a day, morning and night. Sort of the meeting at the coffee machine, if you like, to where you don't talk about work, but you've got to engage, and you've got to have cameras on, and you've got to talk to the people and actually see them. But that's some really good advice there. Larry, you've had some interesting thoughts around Thailand 4.0, or as you refer to as Thai Values 4.0. Can you expand a little more on that?
Sure. So, to be truthful, I didn't know a lot about the Thailand 4.0 or 4.0 plans of the government until I just got on the internet and read some a while back. But what I was reading really triggered a thought for me. This is their goal. They say in the next 20 years, the economy is going to switch from a 3.0 economy based on production and exports to one that is based on services. And in order to get there, the 3 drivers are going to be technology, innovation, and creativity. Okay, those are 3 of the main drivers. And that piques my attention, because I happen to believe the more deeply I think about traditional Thai culture, that there are obstacles there in the way. And as I've often said in a number of other venues, we can't just say, oh, look at that nice shiny object out there. That's smart cities, and that's just amazing technology and amazing creativity. We can get there. You've got to ask, do I have onboarded right now what it will take to get there? And we need to talk about things that are getting in the way. And I want to, that's my message with Thai Values 4.0 is this. Look, we won't get there without the right values. And we won't get there if we stick totally with the traditional values as they are right now. Let me give you some quick examples. These are some very, very Thai behaviors in the workplace. Avoiding difficult conversations. Saving face, just to preserve group harmony. Taking negative feedback personally. Conflating the concept of criticism of your behavior with criticism of your self-worth, not being able to separate the 2 things. False assumptions about failure. There needs to be a total remake of the narrative around failure. Because failure is a teacher, failure is our friend, failure is that which presents us with opportunities to learn lessons we won't forget, so we grow, so we change in positive ways. There's this national focus on error prevention and on coloring within the lines and getting it right every time. No one gets it right every time. There's a fear of candor. There's a fear of an openness and honesty and communication because of the old rules of Thai face work, which say that that's simply too risky. It has created this phenomenon of feedback only flowing downward in organizations. And feedback must start flowing in both directions. Learning the art of saying necessary goodbyes. In other words, people who are underperformers, showing them the door with some generosity, and knowing that from here on out, for these kind of creative organizations, being just good enough is not good enough. You've got to really get people who are absolutely excel and are at the top of their market. There's a huge reluctance, traditionally speaking, in empowering subordinates because it starts eating into some of your power in your territory. So the idea of sharing power really needs to become front and center. Empowerment, you know what empowerment does is it heightens the sense of accountability. I hear oftentimes, how do you get my workers, my Thai workers, to be more accountable? Well, are they empowered in the first place? You can't expect somebody to act like they're being accountable for something that really they have no power to make that decision. And it goes on and on. Just leaders who listen poorly, leaders who are telling people what to do. We need to ask more questions, more open questions, and let people talk. Yeah, lots of stuff. Self-awareness too, growing in self-awareness. So these are things that, in my opinion, are getting in the way. They are in the way, and they're going to slow us down.
Some really good points. The one about allowing people to make mistakes. I guess if you think about that, nothing would have ever been invented in the world if people weren't allowed to make mistakes. There was another area you were talking about is leaders learning from their people. And an old mentor of mine once told me, always hire people smarter than you. Do you think that is something that perhaps leaders, and perhaps given we're focusing on Thai leaders, that is something that perhaps they would be reluctant to do?
Traditionally, yes. Because you don't want to show your boss up. You don't want to show him up by being smarter than him. But actually, if you spend your life as a leader always suppressing these types, one by one they leave you, and you end up with all the losers. That's what happens. So ultimately, it's not a good game plan to be threatened by that. Now, certainly anybody new who's really smart, I feel still needs to be people smart enough and treat people well enough and have respect for authority. I think those things are like a lubrication in Thai society. They've got to remain there. But the whole idea that the leader knows everything and all we have to do is come again with our blank slates and he'll tell us exactly what to do and we run off and do the job, that is not going to work. You raise a really great point. I mean, for any kind of creative thinking, it's an iterative process. And it's people getting a little bit of it right and someone else getting a little bit of it right and then saying, nope, that's not right. And it's back and forth working together on it, and nobody has the perfect answer to it. But together you're going to find it. That is a very different model than a leader who feels threatened by hiring somebody smarter than him or her.
I guess you could argue that the more confident the leader is, the more they should be able to recognise that they need people that are, in this case, smarter than them or know different ways.
Right.
And have the have that confidence to do that. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, face work in Thailand and in any society, but especially in Thailand, it is what they call a zero-sum game. In other words, if you and I are two leaders sitting here, for every bit of face that you gain, if I'm proximate to you, I'm going to be comparing myself to you, and I feel like I lost a little bit of face, in doing that. So there's only a limited amount of power available, and we're all trying to cut it up like a kingdom. That's only one way to view power. And there's a more open view of power where power can multiply itself when we give it away. And I think you talk about self-confidence, yes, and it's also what does a person value? If they're telling themselves that the echo of society and what society says about them is the nectar that they survive on, the only thing that they live for, that's a dangerous place to be. And I don't know how you can park your ego or put it aside. That's a fight to the end. What we need is leaders who are confident in their success, in who they are at the deepest level, and whose actually their values and their character are rooted in virtue, so that they use power as a gift for others instead of power as a gift for building their own kingdom. And I know that sounds like almost like too much sweetness and light or too much pie in the sky thinking, but the truth is that is the Barami leader, which is very indigenous concept, is this kind of a leader who leads in a way that is always looking to give honor to whom honor is due.
Larry, some fascinating concepts. You've actually made me sit here and really question about my leadership style. So I will be going back and doing some soul searching. But,
oh dear.
Thank you very much.
That wasn't my intent.
I think we all do. And I think there's been some really, really good points that have come out. And the 4 A's, Larry, I think that's something we need to really reflect on it. And indeed those Thai values 4.0. So thank you again for your time. I think it was invaluable. I think we're very lucky to have someone like you that we can really get some better insights into what's going on. So
thank you, Ian.
So thank you again.